A key focus of positive populism is reforming government and politics so the people's interests come first and not those of the big donors and the insiders with the right connections. A new bipartisan effort to do that is the Go to Washington, Go to Work Act of 2018. The measure was introduced by two congressmen, Democrat Rick Nolan of Minnesota and our guest tonight, Republican Mike Gallagher. So, tell us all about it.
Well, it's a simple idea. On this show, Steve, you've obviously been instrumental in exposing the way in which money fuels the swamp in Washington, D.C., and special interests wield a lot of money. But I actually think there's a more simple and more insidious way in which money fuels corruption, and it's that the constant demands of fundraising are such that it crowds out all the time you need to actually do the job of legislating.
You literally mean that there's members of Congress spend so much time raising money.
Yeah, I think that's the bigger problem.
They can't do any work.
I think that's the bigger problem.
Give us a sense of the amount of time. You know, what's that?
It varies from member to member. I would venture to say most members spend upwards of 50% of their time raising money. And so this is a simple bill that would say while Congress is
they're in
session,
Washington, supposed to be working.
Yeah, that you couldn't raise money. You couldn't run across the street to go call for 3 hours while you should be showing up to your committee assignment, listening to the testimony of the witnesses. Just do an experiment. Turn on C-SPAN. Particularly if you're having trouble sleeping. Turn on C-SPAN,
right,
and you'll see someone giving a speech to an empty House chamber, because it's all theater. It's performance art. It's kabuki theater. And then they'll go across the street and raise money. And I listen, I know I'm new. I know this probably sounds incredibly naive to people far smarter than me like Victor, but at the end of the day, the demands of fundraising grow ever more onerous, and they crowd out the time you need to actually try and legislate and get stuff done, which is a difficult endeavor.
So let's just be really clear with the audience. So your bill will actually make it, illegal for members of Congress to raise money while they're
while Congress is in session. So we're not saying you can't raise money, but while Congress is in session.
Well, what do you think?
Well, I mean, 94% of congressional representatives are incumbent. I mean, incumbents get reelected. So in theory, it's good. But let me play devil's advocate.
Sure.
So if I'm going to object to this, I'm going to say, well, maybe they just don't raise money. They get constituents who say, do you know about this issue? And they get informed. Second, so they have challengers. And so in your bill, as I understand it, the challengers would also be restricted from the days incumbents could not campaign, challengers couldn't. But time is money.
Yeah.
And under Citizens United, the Supreme Court's already said the federal government can't go in and tell you how to spend your money. So for a person who's not in Congress, the government was going to be telling a challenger, say a businessman who wants to run for Congress, by the way, on this day you can campaign and on this day you can't. I don't think that's going to be constitutional.
All right, well, hang on. Hold the response for a second. Let's see what Tammy's got to think.
Well, that was one of my main issues as well, is that the bill it tells people who are challengers that they can't raise money. One of the biggest problems, of course, is the money differential, is that incumbents have these gigantic war chests, and newbies coming in have not a lot of anything, and they really do have to fundraise. So here you've got somebody who might have millions of dollars in a war chest, and some new person wanting to come up, and they've got to really raise money every day and even to be, remotely competitive. And so that alone becomes problematic. I would suggest maybe a good way to start, and I think this is a great conversation, but another way to start is they're already only working 2 or 3 days a week. Maybe if it's about going to work, maybe we need to make them work like the average American does, at least 5 days a week.
Yeah.
And then instead of month-long vacations, maybe it's a 2 to 3 weeks vacation a year. So they would be working, and they can continue to raise money, but they need to be. And frankly, a lot of people think that Congress working and passing legislation is not a good idea, that we need to pass less, but it needs to be better. So let's not mistake volume with quality.
So I agree emphatically with what Tammy said. That's why I also have a piece of legislation called the Do Your Job Act, which would prohibit Congress from going into recess while we have not restored regular order, not done our job of actually passing appropriations bills, because you get into the situation, which we're in again right now, where people are able to hold, for example, the Defense Department budget hostage to other priorities, and we wait until the last second, and we wind up in continuing resolutions that do enormous damage to our military. So I do think that that is a separate and important piece of legislation. On the Citizens United concerns, I mean, we do place limits on our ability to fundraise right now, right? So your ability to give to me is capped at $2,700, so that's a limit. My ability to ask you for money is capped geographically directly. I can't do it from my office in Washington, D.C. So I'm interested in any idea that just forces members of Congress to spend more time. I'm even open to an amendment that would get at that, the issue of a challenger not being as restricted, because I do think that's actually a very real problem. Yeah. The incumbent reelection rate is actually higher than turnover in some European monarchies, and so that is a real issue.
Yeah, I would just say that people in general hate Congress, 11% in some polls, but they like their individual congressman. That's why 94% of them keep getting elected. So when they go out and schmooze, the people who meet them and talk to them, I was just with a congressman the other day, they love them. They talk to them. They learn from them. And so the congressman thinks he's working harder out in Fresno, where I'm from, out in Fresno, than he is in Washington. Right. So it's going to be very hard to tell the constituents. What? That guy who's driving all over Fresno County and meeting this Farm Bureau group and this labor group, he's really goofing off and just raising money. He may be, but it's going to be a hard sell.
Well, I think Tammy had the crucial point on that, which is, quality, not quantity. Sure. But last word to you, Mike. I just wanted to ask you, we've talked about this stuff a lot, and it seems to me you're really at the forefront of trying to do something about all these frustrations that people have and the way that Congress is broken and politics are broken. Are you a lonely voice? Do you feel you have allies? Is anything going to happen?
I don't have a lot of friends. I actually sense there is a shared commitment to reform among the newer members of Congress, and it's on both sides of the aisle. I wrote an op-ed on reform with a Democrat from Silicon Valley, Ro Khanna, who I will never agree with on the role of the federal government in our healthcare system, but we had some similar overlap when it came to reform ideas. And there is a movement bubbling up right now of people saying, listen, business as usual in Washington, D.C. does not seem to be working out well for either party, and certainly not for the American people. So how do we change it? How do we change the process? So even if we get the best people in Congress, if they meet the buzzsaw of a broken process, they're not going to be able to get anything done. Yeah. And so I sense there is something changing.
Okay, good. And again, reminds me of something else Tammy said, which is just get new people in who support this more populist agenda, and then things really might start to change.